Hello, everybody. A few data points. First, within 3 short years, over 65% of top grossing mobile game studios have launched their own web stores. Secondly, anecdotally, at the last few gaming conferences, a number of game executives have told me that as much as 40% of revenue can now come from web store instead of directly through the traditional app stores. Gil Tov-ly, the CMO of web store creation partner AppCharge, mentions that many of his customers have increased total revenue by 20 to 30% by implementing a web store. Now, this may be why they are now in 3 years on a $200 million revenue run rate. But be careful. Executing a successful web store, according to Gil, is not just about features, and not all web stores will have the same impact. Further, not all games will see the same success using a web store. To understand the current state of web stores and the potential economic impact, as well as advantages from operating a web store, I spoke with Gil from AppCharge on this topic. Stay tuned to learn more about operating a successful web store starting right now. Hello, and everyone, and welcome. Today I'm here with Gil Tov-ly, who is the CMO at AppCharge. And AppCharge is a company that is involved in basically web stores. And Gil, I know there's been a lot of kind of excitement around the potential of whether it's alternative app stores or web stores. And anecdotally, I've been hearing a lot from different studios who are now suggesting that a fairly significant amount of the revenue that they generate can come from web stores in particular. And so I thought we could start with that. And I know that AppCharge, and we can get into this later, has been doing a pretty significant amount of business, and there seems to be a lot of growth in web stores. And so maybe we could start with this first question. We've seen a pretty big trend in terms of the shift of developers to go directly to consumers with web stores, but can you speak about this trend? And maybe more specifically, what is the motivation when it comes to a game development studio? What can they expect in terms of if they were to support a web store? What do the economics look like to them versus just having the support for direct IP in a typical app store?
All right, great question. So for the risk of sounding obvious in some parts, let me literally start at square one. So let's say you and I, Joseph, decide to open a game studio together. We ship our game. How can we drive revenue from it? Right? We basically have two main options. One is ads in the game, and the second one we can build a store and sell stuff. In IAP, in-app purchases. And for any of the listeners who weren't aware, anytime a player buys anything in the in-app store, for example, the iOS, the publishers like us, our new studio, we pay Apple 30%. Apple keeps 30% of that sale.
Mhm.
So in recent years, like specifically the last 3 years, publishers have started looking for a way to sell directly to players, and they started building these like e-commerce web storefronts that sell the exact same things that players can find in the in-app store, but on the web. Players can go to the web, buy the things there, and then they return to the game and they get the item. It's there, or the currency, or the coins, or whatever. And unlike purchases done on the App Store, purchases on the web, you don't have to pay the platform fee. So instead of keeping 70%, our studio for these types of sales, we can all of a sudden keep like ballpark 95%. And that's way better than that 70%. And that difference in margin is what drove this industry forward. So the economic difference or economic impact is massive. So when you add all of these transactions together, when studios build these stores and then they educate their players that these stores exist and probably have better deals, and players start migrating and doing more and more purchases on those web stores. When you take all of that together cumulatively, we have many clients who were able to see a 20 and 30% rise in their total revenue since launching a store with us. So it all adds up, and it's a very significant bump in revenue. And if you look into guys, the podcast has covered a lot of stuff over the last couple of episodes about like profit erosions in the space, and how since ATT mobile studios are finding it hard to like break even and turn a profit, every little bit helps. So when all of a sudden you can have a 30% uptick to your bottom line, That's very significant. And that is what drove the industry forward and adopting web stores so rapidly over the last years.
Right. And Gil, maybe we could dive into that a little bit more specifically as far as the economics and the impact to a game studio's revenue. So you're mentioning net revenue could increase by as much as 20% or more overall, which for many developers who are like on the brink of profitability, that could actually have a huge impact on their business. But then that would also suggest if they're seeing a 20 to 30% increase in overall net revenue, that a significant amount of the traffic that they are getting, or a significant amount of the transactions that are happening are occurring in the web store versus direct to Apple or Google. So can you speak about that? Anecdotally, I have heard as well that there are some games that may generate as much as 30 to 40% of their revenue from a web store relative to an app store directly. I haven't confirmed that, but those are some of the rumors that I've heard at various conferences and things like that. But can you kind of comment, like when you look at your customers and the kind of customers that are seeing significant amount of transactions going through web store, can you talk about what a typical number like that could be? And then why do some games have a significantly greater percentage of their revenue flowing through web store versus others?
All right. So there are a few topics here. So let me try to unpack them one by one. First, when the dynamics of a web store. So when a studio opens a web store, there are two things that are happening. One is in the individual transaction level. So each individual purchase, if the studio was able to get that player to buy on the web store and not in app for the same exact thing, he's keeping 35% more margin or 30% more margin to himself, to his bottom line. That's one for one. But the second effect that also happens is that it's not just a matter of migration. It's not just like pushing a certain percentage of transactions from place A to place B. What actually happens when players have more options to buy, they end up buying more. So the pie increases. So that's the second effect. And put those together, that's like the driving force in those studios who are seeing 20 and 30% right, growth to their total revenue. As to, sorry, what was the second part of the question? The type of games, right?
What
So
Right, the type of game seeing more transactions on web store relative to other games.
So yeah, we are seeing some variety across categories. So some categories will definitely is achievable to them to if done correctly, like say for example within a year since launching, it is achievable and it is doable to reach those like double digits, like 10, 20, 30% of revenue done through the web store. Some other games, it's a little bit different. So let me try to break that down a bit. The games that are seeing the most success in D2C in general, in web stores, are typically games where their average purchase, their VIP clients, or some studios call them whales, are significantly more impactful in their purchase power than the average purchaser. So when you think of categories like casino games or very maybe hardcore games, where you can have a very significant power user whose average transaction is 10x or 20x compared to the average purchaser. So what does that mean to the studio if he wants to succeed in its D2C strategy? It means that the studio only needs to educate like a very small portion of their users to adopt the web store as a habit. And they can even make it exclusive just for VIPs. It's a much more manageable task, and those are the genres that are seeing more success. In contrast to that, there are other genres like casual games where you have a way higher number of players, and the average transaction, like there's not that much of a delta. You don't have power users in casual games typically that will do 20x compared to the typical purchaser. So to see success, casual games will actually need to educate 10% of their player base, 20% of their player base, 30% of their player base to go and migrate to the store and adopt that as a habit. And that's a much harder deal. It's not
Right.
impossible. It's not impossible. We are seeing some of our clients are casual games and they're seeing great success. But the stacks a little bit, the odds are stacked against them a little bit more compared to compared to casino games.
Got it. And so I think that's kind of an interesting point that I don't hear a lot about, which is this point that if you have a game where you have, whales, or you have certain transactions that are significantly more than your typical transaction, that if you're able to capture those kinds of transactions, and certainly you don't actually need that many transactions to go through the web store, but the higher transactions going through the web store would definitely have a greater economic impact on
Yeah,
your
I can give you
business.
an example from a real life client.
Mhm.
Again, without mentioning the name of the client, one of our clients is a very popular casino game, and they saw out of their top 2,000 spenders, only roughly 10-15% of those spenders actually migrated to the store and adopted it. But their transaction is so significant that that's like that's good enough. That state is also already flourishing with their D2C strategy, and it can only get better from here. Like they got the hunger, they got the appetite, they see the potential, and they say, hey, we only got this for like 10% of our top 2,000 spenders. What's going to happen when we're able to like get all of our 2,000 top 2,000 spenders migrating to the store? So it takes a very small amount of players to do this properly. It's not easy, but if you do it properly, to drive an impact and have a significant scale to your store.
Yeah, and this kind of reminds me, like back in the old days, during the early days of mobile, I remember that there were some game studios that, to their VIP clients, they would establish a direct one-to-one relationship, and then they would try to take payments off of the App Store and in alternative ways, and give them different promotions and things like that to encourage the whales and the VIP high spenders to get off of direct transactions through the mobile app stores. And so this certainly seems like a way in which you can do that at a greater scale. And it also would then potentially suggest that, to the degree that you can actually support the kinds of VIP programs and different kinds of monetizing or incentivizing behavior for your VIP spenders, that would potentially have this impact of also encouraging greater spend and things that you're mentioning. So maybe I could now ask you about this relationship with a game studio. And so when it comes to supporting game publishers or developers, as far as like the features or the capabilities of the AppCharge platform, could you talk about what is there? It's so I assume it's not just, the transaction itself, that there are other capabilities and things that you do on your side. So can you speak to what are those additional things that you guys provide for a game studio with respect to in a web store? And then also, if you could speak to the player experience, because I think there's a lot of listeners who are probably worried about, okay, if we support a web store, is it going to be a bunch of taps? Is it going to be taking me out of the app? There's a lot of concerns about what the player experience would be. So if you could also speak to that as well, that would be great.
Great. So again, allow me to take a step back and just like lay down the
Okay.
space, right? So if I'm a studio, I have millions of users, I do, I don't know, $100 million a year in sales. And I'm from a certain genre, no matter the category. If I decided I want to step into D2C and start selling directly to my players, I have a few options. One is to build everything in house, right? Start at the ground level, build a web store with my front end developers, integrate like a payment provider, pay taxes on my own, sell across the world, be compliant, and keep my users' data safe. That's like the ultimate like bare bone, I'm going to do everything approach. That's like the Playtica approach, right? We're going to do everything. And on
Yep.
the other side of that scale is a studio that says, you know what, that's not my core competency. I don't want to have a 50 people team doing this. I want those 50 people to build game features. I'm going to outsource the full thing to a partner, for example, AppCharge. And we do A to Z, we do everything with our clients, from building a store to accepting payments globally to all the merchant of record services like paying taxes and all of that. And there are many I outlined the two edges of the axis. There are many places, there are many gray areas in between. So some studios might decide that, hey, you know what? We are super, we want to keep very hands-on approach to the user experience. So we don't want anyone, we don't want to outsource like the UI. We don't want to outsource building the store to someone else. We're going to build the stores ourselves. But hey, you know what? It doesn't make sense for us to charge payments and pay taxes. So we just want a payment a checkout solution. And AppCharge does that as well. So some of our clients have operated their own stores and they use the AppCharge checkout as the payment provider. So no matter how much you want to do in-house versus outsource, there are different layers to how you can do this. As to player experience, Sorry, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I'd like to go into that in a little bit more depth, but for that part of the question, yeah, let me follow up. But maybe you could also answer the player experience question as well.
Could you repeat the player experience question?
Sure. Okay. So the player experience question is essentially that I think that there are a number of game development studios who might be concerned about if you're going to a web store, what that player experience would look like. So maybe you could just kind of high level describe to a player, what does that look like when they go to a web store relative to the direct purchase through the app store that they would typically be used to?
Okay, so we didn't get into regulation, what is allowed, what is not allowed, but it is important to lay out those differences that a web store is a new place to make purchases. It's not supposed to be a replacement to your game's in-app store. Players typically will visit your in-app store while they play, maybe because you as a game developer have introduced a trigger or some frustration that they can go to the store and buy something to alleviate that frustration or for other reasons, but it's usually during play. Like players will rarely, like in the middle of their day, take their phone out, open the game just to go to the store, buy some things, and close the game. A web store, in contrast, is a little bit different. It's a space that is dedicated to purchasing. The users who go and visit the web store visit it with the intent of buying. It's usually without the intent of playing. It might be separated from the actual play session. So for publishers who may be concerned about, okay, so if I build a web store, it's gonna like maybe impact my players' engagement numbers, or they're gonna play less, or I'm gonna lose them to like the web store. It's different scenarios. It's different case studies where they'll visit the web store and they'll visit the in-app store, and the two coexist. And that's the beauty of it. To do this right, and like I said before, it's not easy to do it right, but to do this well, you have to keep the two in mind, and you have to have an overall strategy that takes the two stores in mind and balances out between them. So there needs to be some better offers for players to find the web store, for example.
Yeah, Gil, maybe the question I'm asking more specifically is, for example, so previously, and I don't know what the current situation is, if you wanted to download an alternative app store, for example, at least on Google Play, you got like a million pop-ups warning you, do not do this, danger, danger. And so from that perspective of the player having to tap through to like purchase on a web store versus directly in mobile, what does that look like? Are they going to get 20 pop-ups warning them that they're in trouble and they're doing something highly risky, or is that now all smoothed over so that that player experience through checkout is seamless? Is the question I'm trying to get to.
Just to set some lines in the sand, I think what you're describing is a super important and interesting trend that is spiraling it up, which is alternative app stores, in-app purchases using third-party payment providers, and all of that. Yeah, that area is still riddled with regulation and these scary pop-ups of like, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" Um, that is not web stores. So web store, the analogy to that is an e-commerce store that you'll visit to buy shoes, right? It's on your browser. It's on the mobile web. There are no warnings. There are no pop-ups. There are no gates that the platform puts in front of the user if he wants to buy. That being said, unlike a shoe store or an e-commerce store, it's a new experience for the player. Your player is probably not used to the fact that your game, his favorite game, even has a web store. So when they first visit the store, they might be visiting it with some concerns or some fears. Hey, is this an official store? Does this look like the game that I'm playing? Is this officially by this developer? Is it safe for me to put my credit card details here and buy? So things that might be trivial by now with e-commerce might be a new experience because this is the first time that these players are buying the digital goods on a web store to the game that maybe they've been playing it for years, but they were used to buying on Apple a second ago. So it is there are no barriers, there are no pop-ups, but you have to keep in mind that for the player, this might be a new experience. So you have to be minded of like, hey, I want to alleviate those concerns. I want to give them enough confidence that this is in fact official. This is in fact my store as a publisher. And I'm going to support all these payment methods. I'm going to be very upfront about who the charger is, that it's me, what he's going to get from the game after he buys on the web store. I want to make sure that after he buys, if he goes visit the game, the item is going to be there waiting for him to make sure that the experience is as smooth as possible.
And kind of going back to a previous question where I was asking you about the kind of support that you guys would provide a game development studio. What I'd like to follow up there with is to really break down more specifically kind of like the capabilities and features that you guys are bringing to help developers with their web store. And so kind of so one point that you mentioned is this importance of trust, right? And so if I'm a player, if I'm going to a web store and it looks kind of janky, then you probably don't trust this web store and you may not pay. And so it's got to have a certain level of professionalism, look and feel. And so maybe there's some things that you guys do to make that web store look as great as possible or as trustable as possible. I think there's also this concept of different kinds of features. So in the AppCharge website, I noticed that you guys support some level of gamification, but also when you're talking about, especially if you're seeing a higher percentage of VIP players shift to web store relative to direct, then being able to create certain kind of programs and things like that to help incentivize VIP players. And so there's certain number of features that you guys may provide out of the box that's helpful of establishing that web store. There's also this notion of fraud and how you guys would address fraud that I'm sure game developers, that's not their core competence. They don't want to be involved with things like fraud. There's certainly fees that you guys charge. And so whether it's just for the payments like in Xsolar or a Stash relative to what you guys are doing on the payment side and the other things, but as far as the fees, because that cuts into the margin, and then potentially like payment integration with other alternative forms of payment, and certainly in like T2, T3 countries where they may not have wide distribution of credit cards. So if you were to categorize, and again, this is me just kind of thinking of broad categories of value that you are adding to game development studios, could you confirm with me whether you agree with those kind of categories of value that you're delivering? And is there anything that I missed? And if you can also step into what you guys do specifically in those areas, that would be great.
Yeah. So starting again at square one, AppCharge is a little bit different than other vendors in the space, which was what attracted me to join the team when I met them.
Okay.
The entire AppCharge team comes from building and scaling top grossing games for decades. The entire team hails from companies like Moonactive, Rovio, Playdica, and other very successful games that were able to reach incredible scale. Some of those companies the team has actually built D2C strategies in those companies before forming AppCharge. So we took all of those decades of experience and we then poured those into our product. And we basically built the platform, the payment platform that we would have wanted as mobile game builders ourselves, mobile game makers ourselves. And that really resonated with the market. That's why we saw like such a big like market adoption. And we've been seeing a lot of success with studios like Huge Games and Uploving and many others that really see those differences in how we built our product to cater the needs of a large size studio. We, as industry insiders, we strongly believe that to do this well in this mobile gaming space, you need a dedicated tailored solution. You can't just like have a one size fits all payment solution and have expect it to fit what a mobile game needs and what their players needs. So that's like on high level. We're built different because we all come from gaming and we fuse that monetization experience into everything we build. Speaking of the features, that's one facet of it. That's one aspect of it. We again took all of our decades of experience in designing engaging features that get players to explore a new store, to keep coming back, to increase their cart size and additional features. And we package them and offer them as things that our clients can add to the stores using our platform. So those are features like a daily bonus, an accumulation bar, and a bunch of other features that make the store experience much more pleasant to players, all the way from the first visit, like you mentioned, with the trust, with easy login features, with insanely branded stores that feel native to the game, so the players feels at home, all the way to like conversion features and value add features and features that keep the players coming back and adopting the store as a habit. Very proud of our feature set, and again, that resonates with our clients. And we're seeing the clients that we started working with keep sending more business down our way to have us build additional stores for their studios under their portfolio. The other element of help or features that you mentioned, having a wide array of methods, having a wide coverage of different currencies, so players around the world will be able to pay in their local currency. That is also a service we provide. AppCharge supports 500 payment methods and 100 currencies. And again, we built this like that because we knew that this is what mobile gamers need. Mobile gamers need to feel seen. They need to feel at home. And if you visit the store of your favorite game and you're unable to buy it your local currency, it feels like you're left out. It feels like you're unseen, especially in like these tier 2, tier 3 markets where oftentimes those currencies aren't even supported by the official like iOS store and Google store. And all the way back to fraud, the third item you mentioned of like we call those merchant of record services. So fraud, tax payment, compliance, and all of that. We knew that again, as mobile game makers ourselves, we knew that studios want to focus on building games. So we need to make sure that we design a full suite of services and value that we can be that merchant of record for them, and we can take care of everything at scale. So what might be boring to other people, like specific tax regulation in a specific address in the state in the US, or the intricacies of handling disputes and chargebacks and like fighting chargebacks on behalf of our clients. What other people might find boring, we find like we geek out about that stuff. We find it interesting. We keep innovating around that, and that's a whole section of our company to make sure that we excel at that as well. So as a whole, we try to really give an A to Z solution, give mobile game studios everything they need to sell directly to their players and do this at scale.
Right. So just to summarize, so if I'm a game studio and I'm trying to evaluate a web store partner, the questions or the different features or capabilities that I should be looking at is one, the mobile web, the web store features in terms of like branding, look and feel, as well as like gamification, all the different kinds of things that you can integrate into the web store, fraud, fees, payment integration, and those are the different things that I should be asking a web store partner. And is there anything else that I left out, or are those the main things?
So I would say yes, but I would say also caveat that it's not really an arms race. It's not a feature war. It's not who has the most
Okay.
features,
Mm-hmm.
because it's how you apply those features. I think what's special about the way that we operate is that we see ourselves as an extension of our client's payments team.
Mm-hmm.
We invest a lot in the stores and the clients that we take on. That's why we're very selective of the clients that we do take on. And our teams work days on end and weeks on end, again, on store design to make sure that we get the sign off of our clients' designers, that it feels like the game, on player adoption, on go to market strategies, on deep level data analysis to find new opportunities in price point. We see this as an ongoing relationship, and we take our time. We know it's a journey, and we're able to achieve success after success consistently across clients and even within a client across studios in a way that really is the difference. So what to refer back to your question, what should a publisher be looking at when exploring different vendors or different partners for exploring D2C is talk about your game, talk about your space, talk about your players, talk about features that resonated with them and didn't resonate with them. And if your counterpart is having active discussion and conversation with you and trying to find the right set of features, set of strategies to have success for your game, that's a good sign. And if your counterpart lists the supermarket list of like all the features you can offer, and you think you should add all of them right off the gate in a way that might be deterring to your players or might feel to your players as overgrabbing, overreaching, that's probably a red flag.
Okay. And so just to summarize your point there, I think what you're saying is that because you guys are specializing in web store, specializing in ways of monetizing a player base in terms of best practices and like, how do you present the best web store possible, that your partners or your customers is essentially getting what is the best ways of monetizing and doing things, and that's kind of being reflected in your product and how you work with the partners.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe the other question I can ask, and kind of going back in terms of the origin behind web stores, going back to, and I think there's probably a number of folks in our audience who are familiar with the Apple versus Epic case. And I think we have Tim Sweeney and Epic to thank for the possibility of having web stores and things like that. But is there anything that our audience would need to know, or are there any specific things with respect to the the antitrust rulings that and maybe you can kind of talk about the rulings and how they've impacted the current business. And I think the other things from like a legal and regulatory perspective would be, how what do you think are upcoming changes? And certainly in the alternative app store case, which maybe I can ask you a little bit about as well if you have any background behind that later. But certainly in that case, there are differences in terms of geography and things of that nature. For web stores, what is the current legal and regulatory kind of situation? And are there going to be geographical differences, or once you roll it out, you can roll it out globally?
All right. So let's take these two one at a time. Let's start with the current situation and regulation. So let me start at the bottom line, to be clear. We're seeing in the last couple of years, we're seeing good steps in regulation, but as it stands now, publishers are still constrained by platforms and restrictions. Currently, publishers still can't, in most regions, include link outs in their apps. They can't tell their players that a web store exists. They can't choose the payment provider they want to work with. They are constrained and restricted to only be working with Apple Payments or Google Payments in their app. They can do direct relationship with their players. So in most regions of the world, this is still the case, and that's bad. But it's also an interesting part because D2C has seen so much success without regulation backup. So to put it in other words, publishers are not waiting for regulation to catch up. They're going to work. Like they are building their web stores in crazy amount of adoption rates. And they're seeing a lot of success, like we mentioned before, like these 20 and 30% of revenue without regulation allowing that. Now that being said, that is the current state today. And it's important to say that. So there are good things coming, but as it stands now, there aren't any real world changes for most of the publishers. That being said, we are seeing unprecedented things. Yeah, like thanks to Tim Sweeney and for the others like pushing this fight forward, and for very forward-thinking regulators across different regions, we're starting to see the first blooms of that. So just this past August, Epic has launched the Epic Game Store in iOS. It's an alternative app store in iOS. Like this is unheard of, right? You can, in the EU right now, you can go and download the Epic Game Store, and through the Epic Game Store, you can then download Fortnite, which is not available in the official iOS store. That like who would have believed that will be here mere 2 years ago? And this is the first sign of what's to come. So working my way back to the second part of the question, where the industry is going, we see like sideloading as alternative app stores as the next big trend of the D2C industry. So if so far a lot of studios have been able to achieve great success with web stores, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Once we continue seeing regulation changes and across more geos, and publishers are going to start having alternative versions of their app with purchases being powered by third-party payment providers like AppCharge and not through, say, Apple Payments, that's where we're going to see a big shift and even much more significant increase of the TAM, the target addressable market of this space.
Okay, maybe I can ask you just two final questions here. But I think that there are some people who prefer that direct relationship with customers. And when we think about like having game studios develop a more direct relationship with their customers from a D2C perspective, I think there are some arguments that by having your own web store that you do have a greater direct relationship with your customers. Can you speak to that? Like, is there beyond just the margin, right? The app store fees, what else would you characterize as an advantage of having a web store for a game studio thinking about wanting to establish a better relationship more directly with their customers?
Yeah, so you're hitting a really important point, right? Like when web stores started, the main driving force was that margin, that's like that 30% cut that people didn't want to pay Apple and Google. But as webstore started maturing, studios understood that there's actually a lot more benefits that are being enabled by operating a web store at scale. So at the heart, yeah, it revolves around player relationships. So without a web store, if you're the only way you can communicate with your players is through a push app or an in-app message, then your relationship with your players are actually borrowed, right? What if Apple decides to flip the switch? What if Apple says that you cannot say something, for example, send a link of your web store? If you cannot communicate with your players, are they really your players, or are they Apple users that you just happen to borrow? So we saw studios starting to work on these direct relationship, direct communication channels like social media, Discord services, WhatsApp group, Facebook Messenger, SMS marketing, email newsletters. And as their publishers are pouring more and more efforts and investment into these channels, they see that they can suddenly have more control of player loyalty and player relations. And that is a significant advantage. Secondly, once you have a web store, it's a space players can find and gravitate towards. A web store is indexed by Google, which is unlike your in-app store. You can do e-commerce ads to send players directly to an offer with a personalized ads. We have clients who are doing personalized SMS marketing where their players will get a dedicated personalized offer. And through our technology of deep links, a player will click the link and get straight to the checkout in one-click checkout. And it's so effective and so impactful. And by having this space, this very like open web space that is indexed and available, that is being made possible. And thirdly, um, players like anyone who has been doing games for a while like understands that for a large scale studio and VIP clients, there's an element of engagement, there's an element of joy. Like players can actually find engagement and enjoyment in the store, in buying stuff, right? It's not obvious. It's kind of hard to explain to people outside the industry, but VIP clients are actually see this as like a meta game, right? They want to find the best deals. They want to find how to get the most out of their time. And if you give them a web store, if you give them a new space to gravitate towards and crack your deals, they actually can adopt a new level of engagement with your game that ultimately increases loyalty, long-term relationships for years on end, and it's very very effective. And these are just three examples, but the B2C web stores and just in general having direct relationship with your players and selling directly to your players have a lot of these hidden benefits added to it. It's not just the margin. It's not just the 30% cut.
So the final question I have for you, Gil, and thank you for all of your insights so far, but we are seeing essentially a major shift with respect to player monetization and potentially distribution, as you have also discussed the alternative app stores. And so the thing I'd like to ask you is like, if you were to look into the future, let's say 5 to 10 years from now, it does seem like, again, we are at the start of alternative, whether it's distribution, but also player monetization. But in your mind, and given the trends that you guys are seeing, and congrats again. I know you guys have are doing like over 100 million right now in terms of revenue in just 2 years, and so congrats.
We're at a pace of 200 million a year. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So like you're seeing tremendous growth. So what we're seeing basically kind of the start of a pretty potentially major shift. And so I'd love to get your thoughts in terms of what does that look like longer term, 5 to 10 years out, with respect to player monetization and distribution. What do you think happens?
Okay, so there's something very significant here happening with D2C. It's no longer the next big thing. It's happening now. So, like we recently did a market analysis of top grossing games charts, and over 65% of top grossing studios across the different categories are already operating a store. So this is a store. So this is no longer like the next big thing. This is like the new norm. And in-app purchases in gaming is like currently it's like 110 billion-ish dollar industry market, and D2C has the potential to seize say 10-20% of that very realistically. But as I said before, this is just the tip of the iceberg. What we're seeing and what we anticipate happening in the coming 5 years is that regulations will start allowing alternative distribution, so like alternative app stores like the Epic Game Store, alternative payment methods like AppCharge, mobile gaming SDK to power your in-app purchases. And just in general, in-app purchases in mobile gaming is expected to grow to $200 billion in 2030. And with in-app purchases being up for grabs, D2C is going to transition to a $100 billion industry. And we're very happy to be leading this space with our great partners and clients. And there's so much more that's happening, and the rate and pace is crazy. I've been in tech for decades. I've never seen an industry being disrupted this rapidly. In short 3 years, 70% of studios already have a web store. And this is just the beginning, because now we're getting into in-app purchases and alternative app stores. And the future of D2C is so amazing and interesting. And the more tools and freedom we're going to give publishers, the better they're going to be off, the better games they're going to be making. And at the end of the day, it's a win-win, because players are going to see much more benefit as well.
Great. And actually, let's end on actually more information about AppCharge. I think, Gil, I want to thank you for all of the information and insights that you've provided, but maybe now would be a good time to try and promote AppCharge. Why should players work with AppCharge versus other vendors in the market? Maybe you could give us your promotional pitch for AppCharge now.
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Like I said before, we're very selective of the clients we take on. We find the most success with the largest studios in the world, and they find the most success with us. So if you're operating a very big game and you have like a big monetization team, your monetization team is going to love us. We're very happy to talk, regardless if you're working together or not working together. So that's part of our mission. We started this company to share those decades of experience with the mobile gaming industry. So even if you're not working together, if you're a studio, even if you're a studio that has built everything in-house and you just want to geek out about what monetization features we're seeing the most success with, or where the industry is going, where the industry is going, we're very happy to meet for coffee, to talk, and see if our expertise can help you in any way. If that's something that is interesting to you, find us anywhere. You can head over to our LinkedIn or our website, leave us a note, and we're very happy to meet. We're in all the major industry conventions, and we're happy to see how we can help your monetization strategy.
Great. And I'll actually add those links in the show notes. But Gil, thank you so much for all of the information you've provided for our audience. There you have it, kind of an update in terms of web stores. And with that, I will end. Thank you so much for joining us, Gil, and for our audience. We will catch you next time. Thanks,
Thanks
Gil.
for having us. Thanks, Joseph.